Hi everyone, my name is Jen Stewart and I'm a member of the Give Back Yoga Foundation team that's creating this course. You're about to listen to a recording of an interview that I did with Jasmine Chehrazi, which took place while I was located in Kenya and Jasmine was in the US. Jasmine is the founder of the Yoga District Collective of Yoga Studios and also the founder of Yoga Activist, which is a nonprofit outreach organization dedicated to improving accessibility and trauma sensitivity in yoga and mindfulness instruction. She's trained with teachers from a wide variety of yoga traditions and has also taught students of diverse backgrounds, from homeless shelter residents to White House staff. Jasmine believes yoga instructors have a responsibility to adapt their classes with sensitivity to individual student needs. Here you'll have the chance to hear Jasmine share her wisdom around service and what service is, as well as how it shows up in yoga service, with some practical tools that you can apply in your classes. Jasmine, can you share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, I used yoga to cope and heal from my own trauma. Psychotherapy wasn't in my income bracket or part of my culture, so yoga just happened to come my way, and it was such a powerful practice. I didn't really know how to integrate it into my life, into my regular routine at first, but over time I started to, and it really struck me as not really being optional at a certain point. And it's never struck me as a luxury, but I think it's just an essential tool to prevent yourself from going crazy in a world that's really crazy. Mm-hmm. So I think one thing it really did for me was help me slow down and stop and see where I was at. The time I started practicing yoga I was working in an immigration law firm, and I was just working so many hours and trying to get people visas to stay in this country, people who I considered to be more American than me, and the immigration laws were changing and they were getting deported. Mm-hmm. So it was really hard. I was taking that really, personally. Mm-hmm. That was a mistake, but I think that's part of what yoga helped me cope with. And I identify as an immigrant myself. My family immigrated to the United States from Iran during the revolution in the 70s. And I know that resettling is never easy, but I experienced a lot of honor in the work of people immigrating, honor in the resilience and the hard work involved. But that's kind of my background a little bit. Mm-hmm. And related to that, I've always thought of yoga as helping people resettle back into themselves. Like we're all immigrants, and sometimes trauma happens, and we no longer find the body or the mind a safe place to reside because we want to escape what happened. Mm-hmm. Whether what happened is like we turned on the news and got scared about what's happening in the world, or if we experience something more directly. And so I always found this concept of coming back home to a safe home within oneself to be really strong in the yoga experience. And it's kind of paralleled, my family's immigration experience as well.
It's beautiful. And so right now, is there anything you'd like to share about the work that you do?
I've shared yoga in a wide variety of settings, with humanitarian relief workers, social workers, at yoga studios, at shelters, hospitals, jails, just a wide variety of places with a wide variety of people. And I think despite the huge diversity in the types of people we might have shared yoga with, it's all the same. Yoga works the same for everybody. And I think that is the heart of this work for me, is that it's a tool for self-healing, self-realization that works on everybody in the same very subtle ways. Even though we might have different preferences or capabilities to express certain forms or do certain practices, it doesn't quite matter, because ultimately it's getting us to the same place. My teacher, Dharma Mitra, he says, we're all evolving and we just do it at different rates. We're going to get there in different ways. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind.
Our hope is that through this podcast, we're able to give our learners a stronger sense of what service is, as well as some practical tools for how service shows up in a yoga class. To start, could you touch on what service means to you?
The main way I understand yoga service is that it's an act of sharing and practicing yoga as an act of service. And service means that it's offered with no attachment to the outcome. It's kind of like an expression of what classically is called karma yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. If you look at the opposite, it would be yoga that's shared or practiced with an attachment to the outcome, like the outcome of financial survival, or the attachment of the body taking a particular form, shape, or size, or maybe for fame or whatever it might be. There's so many different motivations. But I think that yoga service can happen anywhere, even in a commercial yoga facility like a yoga studio or gym. Just as outcome-attached yoga, non-outcome attached yoga can happen, in a homeless shelter or a jail or prison. So I think yoga service is not unique to any place, is my point. It's really about the motivation. Are you doing it with attachment? Are you trying to save someone? Are you doing this to fix the world? Are you doing this because you want to see yourself as a good person? Are you doing this because you think you should? There's so many different motivations, and I think that is what needs to be studied when we're asking ourselves, is this yoga service or is it something else?
And I've read some of your work, and I know that you bring up this idea that nothing's broken, nothing needs fixing, no one needs any help. And in your experience, what happens when a teacher has the intention to fix someone or help them, or is attached to an outcome?
Well, I'll kind of ask a question related to that. How does it feel when you know someone who has judged you, found you to be insufficient in some way, and is trying to get you to change? So usually it makes people sort of hate themselves for being insufficient, or it might make the person hate the person trying to change them. I mean, that's how I am in my personal experience. But the flip question is, how does it feel when someone loves you unconditionally, when you feel supported to be exactly as you are? And that love usually motivates us to be our best naturally. Like the love of my family motivates me to be of service to them by being the best I can be. The love of my yoga teacher motivates me to be the best I can be. Not once did I feel judged by my yoga teacher or my family. So I've seen it also personally firsthand. There was one organization, sometimes yoga service teachers will ask me to attend their yoga service classes just to give them some insight on what I think in terms of their best practices and whatnot. And it was at an organization that facilitates transitional housing opportunities for people who have experienced homelessness. And the teacher was so kind and sweet, like an angel, and she wanted so badly to help everyone. And she was so attached to the type of yoga she was sharing, the idea that it could transform everyone. She was attached to the hope that the students would like the practice, and eventually a student refused to participate, and some of them could not do the movements that she wanted to share with them. And, one of the students basically conveyed that she thought the class was a waste of time, and she felt insulted that she had to participate. And this is from, no harmful intentions at all. These are very good intentions that the teacher had in some ways, but ultimately they're harmful to the process because they are based on the judgment that what we see should not be. And one of my teachers, she would always say, stop shoulding on your students. Just let it go. Just let people be as they are. Offer it up without attachment and then let it go. And I write about that in the Best Practices article on the Yoga Service Council's website. And I quote Dr. Rachel Remen a lot. She has this article on helping, fixing, or serving, and she describes that service as a relationship between equals. And that is very powerful. And equality is a concept built into yoga philosophy. And it requires acknowledgement that the service teacher and the service community share the same essential nature. If yoga means to yoke, to unite, to help us understand our unity, our sameness, it means that we're compelled to be in a relationship of equals in order to really experience that. That's where the issue of helping and fixing is so different, because you're seeing people as broken, that they are weaker or needier. And it's also pretty dangerous because you might inadvertently take away from people more than you could ever give them by diminishing their self-esteem, their self-worth. Dr. Remen talks about that extensively in her article. And there's even research that says there's basically a huge negative impact on communities who are being fixed or helped. That it basically creates a situation where they might actually feel that they should be indebted to the person serving them or helping them or fixing them in a way that's not healthy. And it's a negative reaction on their own capacities. And I think that's a very interesting study to read. And it even goes further to say that people being helped or fixed sometimes can feel hostile towards their helpers. And we just want to avoid that whole situation by shedding any ideas of what should be in terms of yourself and the students and the yoga, and just let everything play out as it does.
You brought up so many incredible points in there. How does your understanding of service show up within a yoga class or program? So if you could share some practical tools here, I think that would be really helpful.
One of the most important tools is our language, our word choice. And to just take a step back for a moment, even how we define the community that we're serving. I don't ever say things like, I share yoga with the homeless or homeless people. I think it's important to always remind myself and others of our sameness, that we are all people first, and then we're experiencing something else on top of that. And that might be a more honest way of identifying one another. What I mean by that is, I would say, I share yoga with people experiencing homelessness.
It's a great distinction.
It's like a subtle difference, but it helps me not objectify the community that I'm serving. And that's a huge tool, and it might help reset other word choices in the classroom as well. There's not a judgment or a title or a label on things. I actually often don't name poses in classes. I do when it comes up, but I'm often describing what our choices are in terms of placement of the body or breath and concentration, rather than naming it or saying that the goal is to get to this expression of the posture, to just let the yoga do the talking. I think that's a really important part of our sharing yoga in any setting, particularly service settings. Let there be enough space for people to actually experience the pose in stillness or in coordination with their breath. And related to that is this idea of nonviolent communication. So nonviolent communication allows us to look at a situation and make an observation instead of a judgment. And it allows us to pose questions and make invitations rather than commands. Mm-hmm. So a lot of yoga cueing is based on making a simple command. Put your right foot by your right hand. Your back knee down. Lift your arms up. Mm-hmm. That's fine, and that's a sufficient cue in many different settings. But I think it helps create a more inclusive environment to offer more inclusive cues where we invite people, bring your foot forward. I sometimes don't even say right or left. I don't care which side people are on. It won't bar their access to their enlightened state. So bring a foot forward as far forward as you like. You know, reach your arms upward as much as you wish or keep them grounded. Choose whichever option is most supportive for you. You know, explore what happens when you raise your arms a little bit further back or a little further forward. Mm-hmm. You know, how does it affect your breathing? So these are all ways to invite people to explore. And so there's a school of yoga for the trauma-informed in Massachusetts, and they talk about the language of invitation and exploration as being central in their cueing. And it's very similar to what nonviolent communication does. I think it's essential to carry that even further, you know, in addition to giving choice, in addition to allowing people to have opportunities to explore the effects of different choices they make in their practices. I think we also need to employ nonviolent communication in terms of classroom management. Mm-hmm. So in classroom management and outreach settings, it's not quite the same as a lot of yoga studio settings. There's not understated culture that people are stepping into and agreeing to by coming into this space. You, the yoga teacher, are showing up in the community member space. Mm-hmm. It's their culture that operates. So you need to do something in order to make an alignment between the culture you need in order to have the class proceed peacefully and the environment that is the operating culture, the normal culture for that space. And nonviolent communication is essential to that. Instead of it being like, we need to move the mats over here, we can't have class here, or there's too much noise. Instead of coming in with our preconceived notions about what a classroom should look like or sound like or smell like, we just might need to stop and make some observations and just say, okay, this is a loud space for us to practice in. And that's it. It normalizes the situation. If you can't change it, if you cannot relocate the class, you are just acknowledging reality, and then everybody sees you accept it, and they can accept it too, if they haven't already, and they probably already have. So I think it's just important. And also people might come up to you with their own personal situations. They might say, oh, you know, my family member passed away, and what you said in class, it made me think of, you know, on and on it might go. And instead of you playing psychotherapist, because we're not psychotherapists, mm-hmm. We're not. We are body breath dealers. That's the limitation. Those are our boundaries. Mm-hmm. We're body and breath dealers, physical body and subtle body. But we are not prepared to ask questions about what happened in that person's life and how they're processing their trauma. The yoga has to do the talking to them within the poses about that. It's very different. They are embodying their own therapy. We are not their therapist. So in nonviolent communication, we would be taught, oh, I heard you just saying that my cues helped you be reminded of a family member who passed away, and it made you feel like all these things that you just said. And that's all. I wouldn't ask questions. I would just restate to them what they said in the words that they stated it in, as closely as possible, so that they know that they've been heard. And so we're just making space for what happened. We're not reacting. We're not telling people what they should do. We're not saying, I'm so sorry, are you okay? Those are actually not meaningful statements. You actually showing that you care by listening and repeating back to them what they said can actually be a better way of saying I love you than I'm so sorry, are you okay? Because we can't apologize for reality. And what does it mean to be okay? And what's our inclination? Usually we try to say, yeah, I'm okay, without really even thinking about it, whether or not it's true. So nonviolent communication has a ton of really powerful teachings that we can unpack in all of our yoga service settings and our commercial yoga settings as well. The other practical tools I think are really central in my mind at the moment are, just the ability to integrate anything that you would normally consider to be an interruption. And what I mean by that is an interruption is often a situation where you are attached to it being another way. There was a cell phone ringing. I wanted all cell phones off. Therefore, the cell phone sound is an interruption of what I think it should be, the way things should be right now. There was one class I was observing at a nursing home, and the meditation teacher, was a meditation class. We all had our eyes closed, we're all in a circle, and she has a very soothing voice, and somebody's cell phone rings. And immediately she said, that's just a call right here, right now, on your breath. And it was such a Jedi move.
Yes, it was.
Move. I mean, she really called it. And she integrated what others might have assumed was an interruption. In life, too, whenever something comes up and you think, this is not what I wanted on my path, this is bad, it should not be here, that's just an opportunity for you to apply a teaching to integrate it. What can we learn from the situation? How can we apply it to the teaching at hand? One person asked me once, what do I do about my students giggling and talking in class? And to me, I was like, well, that's great. They're laughing and talking. They're having a good time. And I also understand, though, that might interrupt what that teacher was hoping to achieve, maybe this atmosphere of quiet and calm. So if something like that happens, integrate the giggle and the talk. Hey, I hear a lot of you guys talking right now. Why don't we share conversation right now? If you can call out some words that describe what you're feeling in this posture right now. We'll be like, oh, it hurts. Oh my goodness, it's stretching over here. And then I'll ask more questions. Okay, tell me more about that. Is it like a hot feeling or a cold feeling? How would you describe stretching if you really had to get more words around it? Like if we didn't know what the word stretching was. Where do you feel it? What's the intensity? Is there any muscle that's engaged right now that's working really hard? Where's there softness in your body? And to almost guide them through a little Q&A of mindfulness in the posture. So that is a way of integrating the conversation. And then you can say, on the next side of this pose, let's practice it in silence. You can review some of the same questions and descriptions that we talked about on this side, but the next slide, let's be totally silent and see how it affects us to be totally silent in the practice and just concentrate on our breathing and the sensations. And that way you've integrated the conversation that needed to happen, and you've also provided an opportunity for silence. So integrating interruptions, I think, is so wonderful, and just a way of being present and not worrying about what we think should be. Mm-hmm. The other tool that I wanted to touch on is this idea of modified practices for different capabilities, and providing multi-level cues. Mm-hmm. I think this is a tough thing for people, because when we first become yoga teachers, we often think, okay, I know how to cue the pose. We might know how to cue the pose out of a book or like a certain version of the pose, but we don't know how to cue a pose until the student who's going to be working on the pose with us appears. We have to cue the pose for who shows up. And so if you notice that somebody is not able to put their right foot by their right hand, you change your cues. And if you know somebody has an injury or condition, you have to tell them, don't do anything that hurts. Don't do anything that involves that part of your body. You can strengthen and stretch the muscles above and below, but don't do anything otherwise with that part of the body. Mm-hmm. There's a sort of index of common modifications for common conditions and injuries. In the back of that article I mentioned, that's published on the Yoga Service Council website, yes, on practices and yoga service settings, I think that's a really good, quick guide. That we've even had a poster version of mounted on walls at places so that people can peek at it if they have an injury or condition and they know some general ideas on how to modify. But I think it's just important that yoga teachers make clear that the student, him or herself, has to be responsible for not doing things when it hurts, to put that responsibility back in the hands of the students, because otherwise the students might think, oh, well, she's a yoga teacher, she or he's a yoga teacher, that teacher should know what is okay for me. Yoga is supposed to be good for me. I am supposed to do what the teacher tells me to do. Therefore, this must be okay even though it hurts. We can't forget that people have relationships with teachers their whole life before we show up as their teachers, and that those relationships are not always positive. It might not even be the teacher's doing. It might be that you go to school and you didn't listen to what the teacher said, and you get in trouble, so the teacher tells your parents, so you don't have dinner, or worse. Mm-hmm. That is what happens if you don't do what the teacher says. And if that is what you've carried with you as your context for teacher relations your whole life, you will put your right foot by your right hand, even if it hurts you, unless your yoga teacher educates you and makes clear that you have choice and that you exercise that choice. And choice is also important because that is what we don't have when we're in an experience of trauma. All the definitions of trauma share that there was a lack of choice experienced, and that is very essential in trauma-sensitive yoga, cueing for all the multi-level options to just make it a matter of choice and to make clear that all the options are equal. And it's not about getting to a particularly advanced expression of the posture. We don't need that in order to connect with body and breath and coordinated movement in between. So those are some of the, just sort of touching on the central practical tools. And it does mean that people are probably going to have to abandon what they think they're going to teach, that they are going to have to abandon attachment to any particular yoga style or expression of certain forms, and they're going to have to let go of their idea of what the pace should be. And they're just going to have to smile and be a kind, loving presence and do the best they can with whatever is relevant to the room. And it'll be beautiful. As long as you keep your class size small to start with, you really won't have too much on your plate to deal with, and you'll learn a lot. It's really not a scary situation. Just show up and don't worry about the outcome. It'll be fine.
Jasmine, I love the practical tools that you just shared. I think that the individuals listening to this are going to get so much from them. I have one final question for you, Jasmine. For those yogis that are having any doubts or fears about starting out in yoga service, what advice would you give to them?
I would say just show up. Just do it. Just let go of your expectations. And if you're really not sure if working with a community is right for you, I always recommend volunteer in a non-yoga capacity first. That means you might just help pour coffee at the soup kitchen or fold blankets at the hospital, whatever it takes, so that you're comfortable with the community, and then you can take the next step to sharing, breathing, meditation, and posture practices with them. It's in many ways easier than teaching at a studio because there's not any focus on the trendy way to sequence or transition or, what's on your playlist. There's no fancy yoga clothes. There's sometimes not even yoga mats. You don't have to worry about anything. All you have to do is show up and be a loving presence and share even just a little bit.
Those were some great recommendations and points there, Jasmine. Thank you so much for sharing. And on behalf of all of us and everyone listening, thank you so much for being a contribution to this and sharing your knowledge and your expertise after many years of being in this space. I know that the individuals listening to this are going to take so much away from what you've shared today. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's really wonderful that you guys are getting this information to so many people out there who I think will really benefit. And I think that the benefits are going to be contagious. Not that we're attached to the benefits, but they really are. I'm confident they will be.
We hope that you enjoyed Jasmine's podcast. We're deeply grateful for her contributions to this course. To get you reflecting on what you've just learned about what it means to serve, we've created some thought starter questions listed below. We hope that you'll take a bit of time to reflect on what the learnings mean to you personally.